Call to order the January 18, 2018 meeting of the Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency. Would the clerk please call the roll to establish a quorum?
Matt Conant, Nick Avdis.
Here.
Tom Barandas.
Here.
Brian Holloway. Cyril Shaw.
Here.
Angelique Ashby. Jeff Harris.
Here.
Rick Jennings. Sue Frost.
Did you call me? Yes, I'm here.
Don Natoli.
I'm gonna do better now, I promise.
Howard Schmidt.
Here.
Patrick Kennedy.
Here.
Phil Cerna.
Here.
We do have a quorum.
Thank you. Would you please join with the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This meeting of SAFCA is being broadcast live and will be cablecast without interruption on Metro Cable 14 and will be re-aired on Saturday, January 20th at 2 p.m. and Sunday, January 21st at 9 a.m. It's also webcast at www.sacmetrocable.tv, and streaming video of the board meeting is available on SAFCA's website within 48 hours after the meeting. Members of the audience wishing to address the board should fill out a blue speaker form located here on the lectern and bring it to me. When addressing the board, please identify yourself for the record and please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next on the agenda is public comments. I have no cards. Clerk
I
have
do
cards? Okay. Is there anyone in the public that would like to speak to an item on the agenda or otherwise? Okay. Item 1.
And our first item is election of officers for the SAFCA Board of Directors for 2018.
I'd like to continue this item for, oh, no, I'm sorry. Okay, with that, we will open up nominations for the chair.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'd like to nominate Nick Avdis to serve as chair.
Second.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations? We will close nominations. And with that, all those in favor of the motion, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, ladies and gentlemen.
Just want to also thank you, Mr. Chair, for your outstanding leadership over the course of 2017, and certainly appreciate the extra time, having been chair, that goes into the post. And you should leave knowing that I think that sentiment is shared by all of us.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thanks.
that.
Oh, thank you. I actually want to echo those sentiments, Patrick. Over the last year, I've definitely gotten the opportunity to know you quite well through our service together on leadership of this board, and I've learned a lot under your wing, and I very much appreciate the time and patience you kind of showed me along. It's been a great journey, and I can't believe a year's gone by this quickly, and I'm very humbled and thankful for my colleagues' confidence, and I look forward to obviously a fruitful year for us. So with that, I'd like to entertain nominations for vice chair. I have Mr. Cerna.
I'd like to nominate Jeff Harris for vice chair.
Second. I have a motion and a second. Any more nominations? So at this point, I'd like to call for a vote for all in favor of Jeff Harris as vice chair. Signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Mr. Harris, I look forward to serving with you this year.
I think we'll have a lot of fun.
We are definitely going to have a lot of fun. So with that, on to the next item. Madam Clerk.
Our next item is the Executive Director's Report for January 18th, 2018.
Good afternoon, Chair Avdis, members of the board. I do want to take one moment to thank Supervisor Kennedy for all your efforts. It was a pleasure working with you this year and year before as vice chair, and you took a lot of extra effort and did a lot of work on our behalf, so thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Just a few things. I even hate to start with this because of what's going on in D.C. right now, but on the federal appropriations, as you know, the federal fiscal year 2018 started October 1st, and we've almost through our third continuing resolution. Congress is trying right now. There's a proposal in the House to do another one through February 16th. I'll be honest with you, I've been kind of watching what's happening all day, and I don't know if they're going to make it or not. So we could be facing a bit of a government shutdown. Actually, the thing that's going to impact us, I mean, a government shutdown impacts us because we lose progress over at the Corps, but the one that's actually hurting us more is not getting a full year appropriations bill. There was, both the House and Senate had funding for work plan in it. We were trying to compete for some additional funding for Natomas in that work plan, for some additional funding for the Joint Federal Project to finish the closeout this year, and to get started on the work that was authorized in WARDA 2016, for example, work down in the pocket in some of those areas. So by delaying that, it's making it difficult. For example, discussing yesterday at a management meeting on the Joint Federal Project, the Corps may have to put off some of the final work that they need to do to get that turned over till next year if there's not a continuing resolution. So I don't know, we'll just have to see what happens here. On Natomas, a couple of, just an update. I put the map over on the side just as a reminder of how the Corps has labeled their reaches. But Reach I, Contract 1, that's down along the American River, down at the bottom end. As you know, we've had 2 protests to date, and they have gone out for the 3rd solicitation. They hope to have it awarded by February 2nd, and hopefully they've addressed everything that the contractors have protested and anticipate anything else so we can get started on that one. Reach H was awarded. Reach H is over on the east main drain from the American River up on the bottom end there. It was awarded this December 27th. They did get a protest last week on that. And so that's being evaluated right now to see what's going to happen on that one. Now, talking to the Corps, it's not just our projects. They said last year they've averaged about 11 protests for every 12 projects that they bid. So it's happening all across on the federal side.
Mr. Chair, is there something wrong with the contracting process? 11 out of 12. I mean,
well, it's very favorable for it doesn't cost the contractors anything to protest. And so there's actually some legislation being introduced to make it, put a little more pain on the contractor side to get rid of some of the frivolous protests. But I mean, it's very favorable to the contractors. So that's the problem, right? Reach D, this is one that could be impacted. Reach D are doing the pumping plants up along the Cross Canal. Currently, based with the funding that the Corps had, they don't have enough to do all the pumping plants. They were hoping to get work plan money for that. So we probably won't see work plan money before they have to go out February 15th. So they're looking at their options, whether they do a smaller contract or put options in, or how they're going to handle that. But that one definitely is getting impacted by what's going on in DC. They are going to use a different contracting mechanism to see if it helps reduce it. The other two, they did a best values, so it's a combination of the bid price and how the experience of the contractors. This one that they're doing on Reach D is just going to be a low bid, and so they still get protests on those, but they're a little easier to handle. So we'll see what happens on that one. So I do want to switch to some better news. So the American Society of Civil Engineers, Region 9. So Region 9 is the entire state of California. There are 4 regions in the state. So our Flooring Creek multi-use basin project was awarded as the Region 9 Outstanding Sustainable Engineering Project. So we wanted to say congratulations to all of those that helped make that happen, and particularly to Pete Gelfie. That was his brainstorm, and he saw that through. So anyway, good to get a little bit of recognition on that. So with that, that's all I had for now. If there's any questions.
Any further questions for Mr. Johnson? Thank you, Rick.
Thanks.
Next item, please.
Next item, consent matters. Items 3 and 4 are in order.
I'll entertain a motion. A motion by Mr. Holloway, a second by Mr. Conant. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Any opposed? On to the next item.
Separate matters, item 5, resolution number 2018003, amending SAFCA's contracting policy.
Good afternoon, Chair Avdis, members of the board. Jason Campbell, Deputy Executive Director. In a couple of conversations in the recent past, we had discussed a little bit about contracting and a few other things. So based on a couple board members' requests, as well as some information provided by the executive committee, by the finance committee, we thought we'd bring this board item together with the contracting policy, as well as some information regarding our business model at the same time. So today we are asking your board to review the proposed revised contracting policy for SAFCA. And the purpose of this policy update is to validate the original contracting approach, to update the policy to support our current operations and future planned operations, as well as to provide some guidance and controls for our staff as we proceed to move forward with our mission and goals. So a little bit of background about SAFCA. In 1989, SAFCA was formed through a JPA. In 1990, it was actually taken into a JEPA and codified at the state level. The SAFCA funding sources, as you are very well aware, are based on assessments from the local community. Those assessments are broken into 3 different assessment districts. The Operations and Maintenance Assessment District acts as SAFCA's general fund. So I want you to potentially keep that in mind as we move through this, because this is the bread and butter for us to operate and to perform the work that we do in support of the other assessment districts. The other assessment districts, the Natomas Basin Local Assessment District, as well as the Consolidated Capital Assessment District number 2, are really geared around the delivery of flood control, public works, capital improvement projects. And the development impact fee is also of the same nature, just a different sourcing of the funding. SAFCA, as you are very much aware, is in partnership with the federal government and our friends over at the state in performance of the improvements to the flood control system here in Sacramento. The federal government is the primary purveyor of these flood control improvements, and the state is well aware of the need to continue to improve these systems. And through those systems, we provide a little bit of additional service to help facilitate, but also to share in costs for performing the necessary improvements to get us the flood protection that we desire. So the contracting policy provides us a little bit of information starting back in 1996. The original contracting policy was established through some board actions and then subsequently modified through multiple board actions since 1996. For the most part, the contracting policy assumptions back then will have carried through to today, and that is the reason why our contracting policy really doesn't show a major change in what we're asking your board to do. It's actually a consolidation of the actions that you've taken for the past 22 years. So in addition to that, we have to identify what are the reasons for us to do contracting. So this gets into the reasoning behind us having a contracting policy and how we perform our work. So of course, SAFCA, as you understand, has a variable project workload. We have a lot of starts and stops associated with federal funding, state funding, contracting pitfalls, whether it's protests or what it may be. But SAFCA is made up of a small staff that provides that core function of flood control improvements. Along with that, we have a long-term cost effectiveness goal that was established in the original policy and the work up to adopting that policy. That was based, with that policy, there were some original precepts that went into the 1996 contracting policy. That was that SAFCA will manage a large number of contracts. SAFCA will procure and manage in the most cost-effective manner and the most efficient manner, because these are public funds coming from assessments from our community. In addition, contracts will be based on well-defined tasks to start and amended as more scope or more definition comes forward. So this was the case in 1996 when the original policy was adopted. So today what we'd like to do is validate that those original precepts still exist. And I believe, and we believe as staff, that those precepts are still in place and valid today going forward. We still have a very variable project workload, and that will continue over time. We have a small staff considering the amount of work that we're being asked to do, as well as the amount of work that we could potentially affect. And then the long-term cost effectiveness is going to be dependent on the balance between the demand of resources and the ability to provide those resources. In this case, the resources are really labor and money. So when we think about those demands and those resources, we take a look and we have to step back and understand what capacity we should be planning for. So we have to understand how much capacity do we need? When do we need that capacity? What types of capacity do we need? Not all engineers are created equal. Some may defer with me on that. But we do have a number of technical experts that we contract with, and we need to be able to identify all of those different types of capacities that we need to build into our makeup of SAFCA's delivery. And then how do we add that capacity? So again, capacity planning, SAFCA's baseline capacity is amongst us employees and the resources that we have through our assessments. As these projects, which are somewhat represented by these three columns, those could be considered projects as an example. As those projects ramp up, we have a need for more capacity above that baseline. And where that new capacity comes into play is where we start to talk about our contracting. So the purpose of SAFCA's contracting is really to add capacity to meet our variable project workload and to meet the various mix of needs for the projects and the other functions that we perform. So in that vein, we have basically 5 contract types that are identified in the proposed policy. Real property is pretty self-explanatory. We have a number of right-of-way acquisitions and contracts that we perform or have performed or worked through. We have also, for example, a lease for our space that we call our home office. But overall, we also have a number of interagency agreements between the counties, the cities, your flood control districts, and reclamation districts. Those different agreements and agreements that we may have with the state and others provide services that maybe we have signed up to do in relationship to the projects that we've performed, or it's really just for the performance of the tasks and duties that we need. For instance, the county interagency agreement, the county provides a number of internal services for SAFCA, whether it's mail courier services or all the way up to Treasury handling our SAFCA funds. So there's a number of things there. In addition, SAFCA requires commodities and equipment, and we have contracts and purchasing activities that go on there, whether it's stationary or just a copy machine or whatever it may be. But our primary 2 needs are in the arena of public works and professional services. So when we talk about those 2 major items with SAFCA's purview, we talk about contract procurement. And the major components of project procurement are governed by the many different public works laws that the state of California has and that we have to abide by and work with. So in any instance, when we define a public work, which is what we are dealing with our flood control improvements, these capital projects have guidelines as far as the threshold of a project based on the dollar amount, the authority for somebody to actually award that contract, and then the process of how it's procured. So as you can see in this chart, depending on the level of, or the value of the work, you can kind of see that there's some rules that we have to follow and some hoops that we have to jump through. But in the end, ultimately, what we're looking at is the ability for us to deliver projects, and that requires resources. So these construction contracts are really meant to move forward so that we can build the construction improvements in the field. But for SAFCA, it means that we have different aspects of what we need to follow in order to get those projects out to bid and ultimately constructed. So based on the thresholds that you can see here, the public contract code, we have formal bidding for anything that goes above $175,000, meaning that we have to put together a set of plans and specs that's approved by your board, and then ultimately it's bid out, and then your board approves those contracts. Under that threshold of $175,000, we have a number of options, as you can see. Just last year, your board adopted the SAFCA version of CUPCA, which is the California Uniform Public Construction Cost Accounting Act. And what that did is it provided us the opportunity to be able to do informal bidding for projects under $175,000. With that, we have to report to your board anytime that we use that methodology for delivering contracts. In addition to that, like any other entity that performs this type of work or may have to deal with emergencies, we have those emergency requirements where the executive director is afforded to react or respond to an emergency up to a certain limit and report back to your board. But those are the primary fundamental things that are associated with our public works delivery procurements. Along with that, we have a number of professional service procurement contracts that we need to, a number of professional service agreements that we need to procure to provide the primary support for our capacity that I was discussing earlier. So for the most part, SAFCA is a facilitator for these projects. If it's an early implementation, we're on the planning side and we're procuring an engineer that may be modeling the system to make sure that we're getting the right amount of flood control based on the water surface elevation in the river somewhere. We may have a geotech that's out there doing some work to identify the types of soils and what kind of improvements need to be in place. All of those things really lead into us needing to procure services in order to be able to get that technical work done. Those professional services are procured through what we call a qualifications-based solicitation. Request for qualifications is typically written by our staff or by a consultant that's hired to write it, depending on what it is. Somebody that is knowledgeable about what we're trying to procure. Those RFQs are then sent out to the community, the consulting community, to respond with what is called a statement of qualifications. That statement of qualifications is then ranked based on the qualifications criteria established in the RFQ. And then in some instances, it's a single contract, and others, we may have a multiple award. And I'll show you a couple examples of when we've used multiple awards for a qualifications-based solicitation. In addition to the services provided by engineers, attorneys, or any of the professional ranks, we also have requests for proposals that may have some qualifications or special other things. Some of the examples that you may often hear, towing service, for example, you need a tow truck. For application of pesticides, things like that. Those may not fall within the same ranks as what you would normally consider a professional, but they do have specific qualifications. And in those, we may ask for an actual proposal rather than just basing the solicitation or the award off of a qualification. So a couple of examples of our multiple award solicitations. With the levee accreditation project, we had a professional services RFQ go out in July of 2013. That was primarily for engineering services and geotech and the support to put together a design. So that RFQ process went and turned into a contract that was awarded by your board. Ultimately, it led to a set of design plans that was approved by your board, and then it was bid in July of 2017. As you can see from the chart on the right there from our budget documents, that $17 million worth of work was budgeted into this year. So that shows you the award for both the line of professional services onto the construction contracting process. Just one example of our procurement process. In this example here, we have actually two multiple award RFQs that were issued. These RFQs covered not just Natomas, even though I am showing Natomas here. It does cover the levee accreditation project, whether it's on the Sacramento River in the pocket area or in the north area that was just shown. The environmental consulting RFQ was issued in February of 2016. We received a number of statements of qualification from firms. We ranked those based on what the different needs that we would anticipate over the course of these projects that we're talking about. And we identified that there were a plethora of different activities that were going to be taking place, whether it's cultural or biological or any type of mitigation components, that we needed those environmental firms to analyze and produce some sort of working document or entitlement document. So through that process, we did identify a number of firms, and we brought those to your board, and those contracts were awarded and are being used today to deliver those entitlement documents for the levee accreditation project and for the federal program and Natomas as well for some of the LERDS work that we're doing. The right-of-way consulting component of the efforts was also solicited through a multiple award solicitation. That RFQ did cover both major projects, the Natomas and the LAP programs, and that one was issued in March of 2016. Again, we have a number of different consultants that were awarded with different disciplines, whether it be for appraisals or for outreach or for actual managing the transactions. Those contracts were not specifically defined, but we're really covering the overall approach. So again, these multiple award contracts over time will be modified as we move forward, and we have a much more defined scope to produce what the end result is going to be, our flood control projects. So vendor selection is something that I've kind of alluded, or not alluded to, but just kind of described for you. As we take a look at vendor selection, it truly is based on the contract type. Obviously, public works and professional services are very different in the way that we procure those services. But as we move forward, we will continue to manage a large number of contracts. We will procure and manage contracts in the most cost-effective manner and as we can. And we want to make sure that we're continuing to use an efficient approach to spend those public funds. But along with that, the contracts will continue to be as defined as we possibly can when it is time to make those awards. In some instances, we have other reasons for making an award very quickly. In some instances, the dollar amount will also dictate how we do that award, and the sole source justification is kind of an area where we talk about, okay, we have something that may be urgent, well under the threshold, and it may not make sense to go through the entire process of putting together a request for qualifications for somebody to go and drill a couple holes to identify what's going on a piece of property where we may want to use it for borrow or a few other things. That solicitation could cost us $10,000 to produce. The work itself might be $20,000. It seems like that may be something that we would consider as, hey, we have a project. If it's not already covered under a multiple award, is it something that we would justify as a sole source? Those do exist, and if they are over any thresholds that your board has not delegated to SAFCA staff, you would see those agreements coming forward. In addition, we do have annual agreements. We have efforts that may be administrative or other functions that we really can't define. It's kind of on an as-needed basis. Those annual agreements are put into place so that we have that coverage and we can draw upon them when the time arises. And then, of course, we do have contract amendments. In all instances, the scope is not fully known. So as we go through these contracts, whether it's a sole source or whether it's gone through a complete solicitation, there are times when we get thrown a curveball and we have to make some modifications. Or there are times when we have gone through the solicitation knowing that the overall project has not been fully defined, and we will have to amend the contract as it goes forward. And some of those contracts do last for many years. As you can understand, the federal programs that we work on don't get done in the 18 months that we might see a building go up. In some instances, it might even take 18 years to get those improvements done. So as we're working through, it'd be hard to really switch horses as we're riding through this program. And in some instances, if it's a technical approach that has been worked on for several years, and now we're amending an agreement, that is the selection of a new contractor may be detrimental to the overall effort. So one of the questions we have in front of you today really is, are we valid in the approach that we've taken since 1996, and is it valid for us to continue in this approach? And we as staff believe that that is the case. We do know we have a variable workload going forward. We know that we have a small staff that is key personnel that can get things done, and that the long-term effectiveness is going to continue to need that balance. And so that's where the contracting comes into play. So what we're asking is that you approve the policy update, and by doing so, we believe that it validates the contracting approach. We believe it supports our operational delivery method and model, and it provides contracting guidance for us and controls for us to function under. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Yes, Mr. Kennedy? Oh.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. So some of this came up because Director Peters and what did Director Peters say exactly? Oh, no, sorry. But Director Peters and I had a question about this board seems to, and this isn't pejorative in any means, it's just a fact, extend contracts more than a lot of boards that we sit on. And so that's where one of our questions lied. So what is the process of determining whether or not a contract is extended or we go out for another contract? I mean, I guess in the umbrella that we want to ensure that we're not doing it out of mere convenience, but more necessity.
That I could see how that would not be fully apparent at the time. And in some instances, for example, with Natomas and the early implementation program, we have some fairly large contracts that have been modified over time with key personnel providers, whether it's, we have a number of soils engineers and others that have been performing for nearly 20 years, I would imagine. Maybe not under the same contract, but their procurement of some contracts are different. In that instance, one that I'm thinking of right off the top of my head here is that we've had procurements for the early implementation program that were done in the early 2006 range. And some of those programs are still going, and that's because we haven't finalized and closed out the project. So to maybe venture away from the original folks that were there to help us with closeout or to continue some of the efforts that they had, it's not as easily explained. And some of those agreements, when we bring those amendments to you, you see there's like 6 or 7 pages of background information of these were the modifications that were made, this was the original procurement. And we don't want to necessarily, again, change and go to a different consulting firm for the closeout. To answer your question about some of the other agreements that may not fit that mold, we do have a number of discussions internally, and this policy, I think, helps shape that. We have those discussions. It is about efficiency and making sure that we can get these items to you or get them completed as quickly and as inexpensively as possible. And like I mentioned, it sometimes would say, okay, are we going to move forward with a request for qualifications or just change to somebody else that we need to bring in order to change it up? Or is it more efficient for us to move forward with somebody that we already have under contract and that we already know is performing something similar or something complementary to the task at hand. And we would bring you, that's when we bring you those modifications. Some extensions, however, may simply be that there really isn't anybody else available. So without having a specific one in place, I can tell you that we do go through, and I'm sorry I'm not explaining this very well, we do go through an iterative process. Legal counsel makes sure that we are doing things very on the up and up. My responsibility is to make sure that we're doing things on the up and up and that we're following the policies and the rules that are going with it. And we could probably do a little bit better job in some instances of giving you that information and sharing that with you.
Yeah, in fact, I was going to, following up on that, maybe suggest what we can do is up front give a better explanation or a rationale for why we're doing a particular contract method.
I think that'd be helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
Chair Abdus.
Yes, Mr. Shaw?
Thanks. I want to thank you for the work that you've done on this. Sometimes the path of least resistance is just working with the existing policy, and it was interesting to look at it in committee. Is that it was the existing policy was kind of a quagmire of different policies and dollar amounts that were sometimes created for an emergency, sometimes created for a very small project or a very large project. It was almost a written history of flood protection over the last 25 plus years. And so I think that this is helpful. It's easier to understand. I think it will make staff even more, our lean staff, as you've pointed out, even more effective. But I do appreciate, want to point out and appreciate that pretty much anything over $45,000 does the awarding authority is the board, and I think that's important. Not only gives us an opportunity to vet the project or the contract, but it also gives the public the opportunity to hear about it, to offer their input. The one exception, and this is where my question lies, is the $45,000 to $175,000, and that's the informal bid, the CUPCA method you had mentioned. Can you give an example of when we would use we might use that informal bid, when that would be more effective? And then also just refresh my memory what the difference is between the informal versus the formal bid process.
Absolutely. So with CUPCA, it is a public works delivery method. The CUPCA program allows you to basically move forward with construction projects without plans if need be. A lot of times this might be coming into play when you have an item such as maybe you need to replace a fence and it may go around a ranch somewhere. That could be a costly item that goes above the $45,000. But through CUPCA, what would be able to happen is we would be able to do a abbreviated set of plans or some basic scope and be able to put that informal set together and then go out and procure that rather than going through the full-fledged formal process where we have to get the plans designed, bring them to you for approval, go out and bid, come back for another approval. So it kind of eliminates a couple steps for us to be able to deliver something fairly simple. And that threshold is up to $175,000.
Thank you. And one other thing I wanted to point out is that as a board member who sometimes has questioned and maybe even been a bit critical of the number of change orders that happen to an original contract and just the way it has to do with the way that our funding works, but at times it seems a bit excessive. I also I appreciate that we have a cap now in place for the amount of change orders that can be done without each small one being brought before the board, but when that cap is reached, that it will come back to the board. And I think that that's effective so that we don't have, we're not taking items that are the smallest change orders where there's no significant material change, but once again is bringing anything of significance to the light of day and to the board and to the public for vetting. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Anyone else? I do want to add as well that this board when compared to others, does approve. I mean, we're talking a lot of money passes through this board. And without a lot of discussion, there's obviously reason for that, and there's a strong track record of getting projects done efficiently. I mean, we are stewards of the public trust, and obviously we owe a duty to the public. And I think, to Mr. Johnson's point, including something in the staff report, to take that opportunity to remind everybody why we're doing it, or why staff is recommending that we're doing it the way we do it, is in terms of transparency and openness, and just, I think that is wise. So, I have a motion and a second. Mr. Harris and Mr. Kennedy, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right. With that, yes?
Our remaining items are receive and file.
All right. Thank you very much, all. Look forward to a wonderful year together, and I want to dedicate this meeting to my folks. I love you, Mom and Dad. Thank you.
you